Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission regular meeting for May 8th. I now call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Narita.
Here.
Chair Rowinski.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Commissioner Michael.
Here.
Okay, thank you. So during tonight's meeting, the public can participate either in person and remote. So before I go any further to discuss the instructions on in-person and remote, let's, Madam Clerk, can you, do you have any yellow slips, any in-person yellow slips? Okay, no in-person. How about remote? Do we have anybody on our Zoom link? Okay, telephone? Nope, okay. All righty, with that, I'm just going to move to welcome speakers. You know, let's go to the consent calendar at this point in time. There is one item that is for the commission to motion the approval for the minutes of the regular commission meeting for April 10th. Commissioners, are there questions, comments related to the April 10th meeting minutes?
Move approval.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the vote and announce the results?
Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Yes.
Vice Chair Narita.
Yes.
Chair Rowinski.
Yes.
Commissioner Robbins.
Aye.
Commissioner Michael.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda is the general public comment section, but once again, we have no speakers in person, on phone, or through Zoom. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close up that section of our agenda, and let's move to a presentation by Sue Ellen Atkinson, the Principal Transportation Planner for the City of San Mateo. Ms. Atkinson will give us an update on the 2023 Rail Corridor Transportation Management Association Annual Report. The Commission will be making a motion. The motion is to recommend to City Council to accept the 2023 report. So once again, we'll begin with a presentation from Sue Ellen. Following Sue Ellen's presentation, I'll cue again if there's any those in the public, either in person or remote, and following any public comment, questions back to the SIC, followed by questions back from the commission, and then followed by a motion. So, Sue Ellen, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Chair Rowinski. Commissioners, thanks for having us this evening. I'm Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with the City's Public Works Department. I'm lucky enough to have some backup tonight on this presentation. So it's my pleasure to introduce John Ford, the TMA Executive Director and also Executive Director of Commute.org. And joining John is Paul Krupka with Krupka Consulting, the TMA's traffic consultant who helped prepare this report. And they will be presenting the bulk of the presentation this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Sue Ellen, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you tonight. We're thrilled that we're here in May instead of at the end of the year where we have been the last couple of years. We're presenting the 2023 TMA report, And so it's nice to be here at the beginning of the year, and we hope to keep this as the regular schedule going forward. Brief presentation. First of all, the board packet and the information that was in it was excellent. It covers most of what I'm going to be talking about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to be going through some of the details of the traffic counts that were conducted in October. So just briefly talking a little bit about the origin of the TMA, it kind of gives us a starting point to have the conversation that we're going to have this evening and what's covered in the report. So it's nearing 20 years since the TMA was conceived by the city, all the way back in 2005. It was part of the Rail Corridor Transit-Oriented Development Plan. And there were policies in the document that set a TDM goal of reducing trips by at least 25% in the corridor area. Another one of the policies defined a TMA. At the time, it wasn't really clear exactly what it was going to do and how it was going to be structured, but it was the will of the city at the time to go ahead and create it as an effort to help the members reduce their trips to that 25% goal. A further policy in the document was that the TMA submit an annual report to the city on the progress of and activities of the TMA, and that's what we're actually here doing today, is presenting that report. In 2011, the original corridor area was expanded, and as I look at this, show you the map that comes next, the original corridor area is what you see bordered in red, and then the area that's shown in the yellow and black was the additional area that was added to the corridor area in 2011. The TMA is a nonprofit. It operates as a 501c4 mutual benefit corporation. It was originally created in 2011, and then there was some restatement of the articles of incorporation that were filed in 2013. Commute.org has served in the role as the TMA administrator since 2011. We were asked back at that time when it was getting formed if we would help in the formation process in preparation for it to be spun off eventually to be managed independently. Here we are 13 years later, and we are still managing the TMA for a variety of reasons. I started with Commute.org in 2012 and quickly found out that I was also executive director of a nonprofit. And so it's been a long and interesting ride, but Commute.org has continued along, and it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons for us to be involved with the TMA. The TMA board is comprised of one representative from each member project plus the city. So the city has a non-voting seat, and I was thrilled to find out today that Matt Fabry is going to be joining us at our meeting next week as the representative for the city. This is a quick list of the current members of the TMA. Again, any project that gets developed within the corridor area meets certain criteria is required to participate. You also have the ability to optionally join in if you're not required, you still can join the TMA. There's lots of different classes of membership that are allowed. But to date, the only ones that have actually joined the TMA are those that are required. This is the list, and it shows you the status of the projects. And other than the Bay Meadows project itself, all the projects are complete. There have been some that have completed their projects and have gone back and done remodels or revisions of their project after the fact, but for the most part, they are all at this point in time complete. Each of these projects may or may not comprise multiple buildings within their project suite, but in general, it's a single project. So when members join or receive their conditions of approval to join or to develop the projects, those conditions include the mandate that they participate in the TMA, that they join the TMA and they become an active participant. But the conditions of approval and all the restrictions and the agreements that the projects have are between the project and the city and not with the TMA. So the obligations, if there are any, are enforced by the city and not the TMA. The TMA is simply the collection of these projects, providing assistance and guidance and and administrative support for them. But any obligations that they either meet or don't or fail to meet are enforced by the city. Any non-compliant projects are required to provide additional TDM services or amenities to bring their projects back into compliance. And that, again, is worked out between the city and the project itself. In 2023, we did every year we do a cordon count and a trip count. This is something that actually the city used to do up until about 5 years ago. They were the ones that coordinated this, and then it got turned back over to the TMA to manage the process. In 2023, the count was conducted by Hexagon Transportation Consultants. The counts were conducted in October, which is an agreed-upon date with the city and us, and we coordinate that with the transportation consultants. And it's a 2-hour window within a certain day that falls in a certain week every year in October. Once we get that information, the traffic consultant company does their initial analysis. We take that data, then we pass that information over to Paul at Krupka Consulting, who does the additional analysis that goes into the report. All the details of the findings are in the report, but tonight we're here to share just some highlights of that. At this point, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Chair Rowinski and members of the Commission. I'm going to talk about the traffic matters relative to the annual report, and I'll start with trip generation. As John said, the annual counts involve driveway counts or counts at the driveways for all these projects outside of the Bay Meadows 2 area. And this table simply shows what the results are. Generally speaking, everyone was either under or at their trip threshold for the short-term conditions, except Delaware Pacific and 2000 Delaware. Once again, this year, this entity was over 57 counts versus a trip threshold of 52. The other thing of note is that Azara, for the last couple of years, has been very close or right on its trip goal in its count. So that's the summary of that. John, excuse me. In terms of Bay Meadows Phase 2, where the project requires a full trip generation monitoring, which involves counts or cordon counts at the gateways. There are 6 of them. And those counts are done between 4 and 6 p.m. on the same day as the counts done for the project trip generation. The cordon counts tell us how many vehicle trips enter and leave the cordon or the area, Bay Meadows area. Automated license plate surveys help determine a factor called paired trips. That is, trips, vehicles that were observed entering one cordon and leaving another cordon during the time period. The analysis done by the consultant also estimated travel times of the paired trips, and from that, an estimate of through trips was prepared, and the combination of total trips less through trips equals trip generation. The next table will show you this. So this talks about the PM peak hour trips, which is the measure of importance. The total in plus out, 4,075. There were trips not associated with a construction site for the Clean Water Project and the fairgrounds. And then through trips were a total of 1,868. So those were removed from the total, as well as the trips not associated. The total PM peak period trip count was 2178, and that compares to the maximum trip threshold for the second phase medium-term conditions for Bay Meadows 2. Next one. The other portion of the project, the annual reporting, involves TDM, and this was added a few years back to kind of enhance the presentation because of the importance of TDM to the overall success of the management program, or the TMA program. This slide simply shows, kind of in order of use, highest at the top, that bicycle provisions, transit provisions, commute coordination, parking management, and other programs are generally included in all of the TDM plans that were prepared for the individual projects. John? The CCAG, Commute.org, close, right? Commute.org also did the TMA did a survey of members with assistance from John's team. The survey covered these topics really to get a picture of what's happening from the perspective of the members. John? Some highlights here. I'll just click through these. This one is interesting. It shows that the average residential occupancy reported by the members was 93% in this survey, quite high and expected. Residential has been quite high over the period. Average commercial occupancy it was shown to be 70%, which has grown dramatically, and I think this measure wasn't included in the last surveys. So it's a very interesting metric to tell you kind of what's happening generally. Next. The next slide simply shows in terms of the size of bar the most used TDM programs as reported by the members. Bicycle is up at the top, electric vehicle charging stations kind of in the middle, and then other amenities and transit passes and other kinds of facilities are the round out the general summary.
I'll jump back in as we go into the summary. Just wanted to, again, highlight on the survey efforts. This is something that our team surveys the TMA members on, and we've continued to try to add more questions each year that try to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. And last year, I think when we were at the commission, one of the questions that came up was that occupancy rate. And so we wanted to add that because it does have an impact, obviously, on the trips, right? So if you have a property that's only half occupied, it makes a big difference in their trip counts. But what we found on the residential properties is, as maybe to no one's surprise, highly occupied and staying that way. So most every residential property, obviously, in that area, it's a prime place to live, and I think that's why they were at the 93%. I think it will be interesting to see this next year where the office occupancy rates fall based on the changes that have happened that are going on in the Bay Area right now with some of the leasing issues that are happening on the commercial property. So it might be an interesting to see again where we find out where we are next year. So just quickly to summarize what Paul has described and what I was talking about as well. So in the report itself, we described the fact that the Bay Meadow Station 5 project was completed during the year. All but one of the projects, which is that combined project of 2000 Delaware and Delaware Pacific, was below their thresholds. The Bay Meadows Phase 2 full monitoring, they did improve over the last year, and part of that improvement was also due to the fact that the methodology that we used for doing the collections was a better method of using it and less, there was less guesswork, I think, that might be involved. I don't know, that's probably not the right word, but it's an inexact science. But what this new consultant did probably gets us a lot closer to what the actual through trip counts were. All the project plans have been reviewed. Any new project plans that have come to us or any revisions also get added to the program. I don't know that there were actually any brand new project plans this year. Again, there's some changes that happen on these projects from year to year, and when the city is made aware, those project plans get sent to us. We did have 100% response from the members on the survey. It's not a requirement of any condition of approval or anything that they do participate in the survey, but we encourage them to do so, and we had 100% this year. At this point, I'll turn it over to Sue Ellen, or turn it back to Sue Ellen, who will talk about the process of dealing with the non-compliant projects. Sue Ellen?
Thanks, John and Paul. So as previously mentioned, we have two projects that share a joint driveway, Delaware Pacific and 2000 Delaware, that exceeded their trip generation goal by 5 p.m. peak hour trips this year. Contrasting to last year, they exceeded their goal by 15, so they are moving in the right direction. But per the Rail Corridor TOD plan, the city did reach out to those projects and suggested additional outreach and education. Both projects are implementing their required TDM measures plus additional measures. For example, Delaware Pacific is participating in MTC's pilot transit pass program, I believe in coordination with commute.org. So they are offering their required TDM programs, but as sometimes happens, residents may not take advantage of those programs or may have additional trips that push them over the threshold. Next slide. With that concludes the presentation this evening. So just to reiterate, the commission is asked to take an action tonight. Staff recommendation is to receive an update on the 2023 Rail Corridor TMA annual report and make a motion to recommend City Council acceptance of the report. And that concludes the presentation, and myself, John, and Paul are available for any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go to public comment. Madam Chair, nothing in line, online, phone. All right, obviously not in person. All right, then I will bring the questions back to the commission, and we'll start with Commissioner Michaels.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation and for providing all that background information too. That was really helpful. I just have one question, just since we're the Delaware Pacific and 2000 Delaware were on the radar for being over. Is there something clear that should be recommended to them, or what are your thoughts on why they haven't met those, or if there's any, do you think it's just about implementing the programs they already have in place, or do you have ideas for recommendations?
Yeah, that's a tricky project. It's a combination project, two different developers. There's a below market rate side of the property and a at market rate side. Challenging location. Proximity isn't great to the transit. Delaware's pretty busy right there. They are doing a lot of good things, and they continue to add to the TDM programs that they're doing. The MTC Bay Pass project that they're volunteering to participate in, I think could be a game changer, because it opens up not just Samtrans passes, which is what they've been using for many years, but it's going to open up all modes, so they can use Caltrain, BART, Samtrans, anything that they can possibly use. But it's been a challenging property. They've been fighting hard. I know that they invite my team out there a couple times a year to do presentations to their tenants, but it's been difficult for them. Yeah, they are trying.
The only thing that I wanted to add is that I understand one of the things that is very important is really understanding the actual trip making characteristics of the project itself, and this is what I know the owners, if you will, are working closely to understand how their residents use their vehicles versus transit and other modes or non-vehicular modes. One of the things that I believe would be helpful is to capture whatever data might be available from the actual parking control system. The parking garage has gates and card-activated access for residents. And these systems typically have record-keeping capabilities. I know that the 2000 Delaware member had commented that one way that he looks at the 2000 Delaware is using the garage counts. So I think bringing that into the picture would just give another piece of data to help us. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, great, thank you. But it is encouraging just to see that these projects are able to keep their trips down, especially our last meeting was about a TDM plan, and see just like how in reality that plays out and can be effective. That's it, thank you.
Commissioner Robbins.
Sure. Thank you. Interesting report and presentation. A couple questions. One thing, and I've looked at these in the past, I've been on this commission a while. Do we have a sense, or do you have a sense of which TDM programs are most effective at reducing trips? I know it might be project related, but it would seem to me, unless I missed it in the 65 pages or so that I looked at, and I did look at it, I didn't see that, and I think that could be really helpful. Do we have that data, or can we generate that?
I would offer that the survey, the addition of the survey was very important because it did reveal the members' perspectives and observations about this. And in terms of the most effective to the members, from the members' perspectives, the most effective measures are bike facilities. So serving a substantial portion of users that like to travel to and from the projects by bike rises up to the top. The others I think are also very important. The transit passes are used by about a quarter of the members, and that in itself removes vehicle trips, from a portion. The thing I would offer, the thing that's important here is that the overall guidance, city guidance, that is the corridor plan, does not stipulate that the members actually have record keeping and show record keeping of their actual TDM usage in terms of numbers of people by mode, for instance. So it is something that the plan doesn't require it. The members are paying a lot of attention to this and spending a lot of time communicating and assisting their members or their residents and employees. And so the combination of it's back to the point about data. If we have other measures or other points of data that we could look at, we might get a bit of a more complete answer. I hope that kind of gives you does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit, but I think that the council and staff would be much better served if, and then the program itself and the developers or the managers, if we had whatever data was needed to try and pinpoint efficacy, because that's, try this, try that, this has worked, would be more meaningful going forward than just a report, or as a part of the report that could be useful going forward. I mean, that's a comment over a question, I apologize, but that's why I'm asking.
And that gives me the opportunity to ask Sue Ellen if she wanted to offer any thoughts about policy.
I think that you have heard a lot of my thoughts on TDM recently. I was going to say through the chair, I think that John has a good perspective to offer in terms of this throughout the county.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and you're bringing up, the crux of it. My experience with employers and properties throughout the county has been that until they get close to or over the edge of their trip counts and their thresholds, they're not all that interested in doing a whole lot, right? They're just not. And one of the things that's challenging about this TMA and this group is that it's a combination, you have a combination of residential, commercial, single-family residential, a high school, all in the same group, all with different trip counts and thresholds, and so what works for one won't work for the other, right? A developer who, let's say you're a commercial developer and you lease out your buildings to tenants. So now it's the tenant's responsibility to make sure that they're providing those TDM services to their employees, and finding out what those employee trip counts look like becomes not the developer's role, but actually the tenant who's the employer. And so you get further and further away. Whereas on the residential side, it's typically the property owner, property manager is the one that's actually responsible for the tenant. So it's really different.
Yeah, you're kind of leading into my second question, which I'll throw out in a moment. But I just, to cap that with a comment, I think this report is great stuff. But I think going forward, I think the city and its residents, which is the whole point of all this, we're going to be better served if there's a little more focus on what are the most effective remediations, if you will, and I agree that one size won't necessarily fit all, but if more of that came out of the report, I think we would actually move the ball forward a little bit. Let me apologize, I don't want to be rude, but I'm going to toss out my second question because it relates, which is, what is your sense, I don't get this from the report either, as to what are the limiting factors on trip reductions? Are they, to kind of answer my own question with an A and a B options for you that may not be the right answers, but is it just the participants, you kind of hinted at this, not enacting TDM plans until they're pushed, or is it not the most effective plans, or is it quite frankly the market? In this case, meaning people, tenants, commercial and residential, not giving up their cars as much as we'd like them to. And the reality is they still want them. I'm not saying this factually, I'm speculating, but that they still want the cars, notwithstanding living on the rail corridor, and perhaps they're being pushed to go back to work at the office instead of home. I'm seeing that in my client base out in the tech world. So that's my second question tied into it, if you could, and then I'll...
No, those are great questions, and we could spend the rest of the evening talking about it, about TDM, what works and what doesn't, but surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprising, the number one TDM influencer has been remote work, right? So the more people that are working remotely, the better that is for your office occupancy-based ones, right? So you've had a much lower trip count in our commercial space. The flip side to that is your residents that have been working remotely are now spending more time at their homes, and they may be coming and going more frequently from those homes and creating smaller, shorter trips. Whether that shows up in that 2-hour window or not, I don't know. The other thing I would point out is that what you're asking about are great questions to ask for the data and the data collection and the sharing of that information and the reporting back to the city, which is exactly what you get in your new TDM policy that you're looking for. It's exactly what CCAG did when they put in a countywide TDM policy for all new development projects after 2022. Unfortunately, it wasn't there for most of these development agreements that you have with these projects. So what you have is what you have when you did your development agreements and conditions of approval. So to get more, it sounds great, and that information would be really valuable, but it's not something that can necessarily be extracted conditionally.
Cliff, I think that John gave you a good complete answer. My feeling is indeed the point that we've talked about already about project owners understanding and TDM managers truly understanding the changing behavior or the existing and changing behavior that we're seeing. John and his team are on top of this at a county level and really are covering it well. And I think the point is that the more information that commute.org can offer, that more of their commute.org information that's getting to these members, the better, because they are on the tip of it and the front end of it. And that's what I'm trying to say is, understanding what your members can and can't do is really, really important, because it does vary by location and available methods and programs.
Well, I won't beat you all up anymore. Sue Ellen's heard me all too many times over the years. I'll pass on. Thank you.
Any more? No, you're done. Okay. Vice Chair Narita.
Great. Hi, thank you so much for coming, and great to see you both again. So the non-compliance, Sue Ellen, is there a fine at some point associated with non-compliance? I forget.
No, the Rail Corridor TOD plan did not provide for any financial penalties.
And for the TDM policy that was discussed at the joint session with Planning Commission, is the Rail Corridor TDM completely grandfathered in?
The projects that are already completed in the rail corridor area have approved TDM plans as part of the project entitlement. So those are already in place. Any new project that came in would be under the new citywide ordinance.
Okay, so basically like 2000 Delaware / Delaware Pacific into perpetuity, theoretically, could be out of compliance and never receive a fine. But a new development, 5 years from now, let's say, that under the new TDM ordinance, given the fact that there are penalties that are being considered in that ordinance, at some point after a certain number of strikes and warnings, would be fined.
Unless there were direction from City Council on how to approach projects that have approved TDM plans under the new ordinance, then that's possible. It is also possible that a project may want to approach the city for how to revise their TDM plan through the planning process.
Okay, and in the rail corridor plan, there are short and long-term goals. But in the TDM general plan, is there also short and long-term goals? I forget.
No, in the proposed citywide TDM ordinance, there are certain point targets or thresholds for different types of projects. There's no short-term or long-term
Okay,
goal.
there's no short-term or long-term point totals.
Correct.
Essentially, it's just one straight total.
Correct.
Okay, so again, that would be that is a difference right now between the rail corridor design and the TDM policy design.
Yes.
Okay. And then with regards to the mode, I was really interested because that is also an affordable housing development that has been, your face indicates, John, that maybe that was not accurate, but it does say that in the documents, doesn't it? And anyway, so they are consistently below threshold year over year over year. And I was just curious if you could expand upon any insights you had there.
No, that's great, and thank you for the question. I don't believe that mode is a below market rate residential property.
It is market rate. It's not below market.
It is market rate. It's a great comparison because, again, from the survey data that we have, we know that both properties are almost like equivalent in size, 120 units versus 119. The biggest difference that we saw between the two, and their occupancy is about the same, almost 93% across the two projects that we're talking about. The biggest difference I saw when I did a quick analysis was that Mode has significantly fewer adult residents than the Delaware Pacific project. by like 22%. So even though they have the equivalent number of units, you have something like 191 adult residents at Mode and 241 residents at the other property. So you have a higher density, which is going to generate more trips,
Yeah.
especially since those are adults.
Yeah, kids don't drive.
Well, right, and since they're adult, and so it may be a factor of the demographics of the residents, the work type that they have, possibly whether they're remote work capable or not. There could be so many different factors, but in terms of their TDM activities, I'm not exactly certain what Mode is doing. I looked at through they have the standard bike parking and so forth, but they haven't gone to the level that Delaware Pacific has, for example, of providing the transit passes to all the residents in their property. So it's a conundrum. Delaware Pacific 2000 Delaware is actually doing more. They have more TDM programming at their facility than you do at Mode, and yet Mode is significantly below them on the trip counts during that window of trips. So it's a great point. I don't know why it is that one property is generating more than the other. I listed a couple. I know that, again, the project that we talk about, but I'm not making excuses for them, but there is zero street parking, zero drop-off capability in front of Delaware Pacific, whereas Mode does have street parking and street drop-off capability. It's just around the corner, but that can be an impact for Uber, Lyft, and the other types of
This is the
services.
DoorDash argument.
I'm not making the argument. I'm just bringing up the fact that it is a different street configuration between the two properties. That could also be a factor.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I was curious about year over year. I looked at the report that you developed in October of 2023 for, I think, the 2022 data, and I was just curious about year over year, have you noticed any increase in certain types of TDM measures? The data that I saw in the surveys from 2022 didn't seem to be an apples to apples comparison with the data that you were able to collect in 2023, so that's why I'm asking.
I think the best way to answer that is first a short answer, no. And the short answer, no, is because the survey instrument is not aimed at quantification. Quantification, for instance, of what bike racks and storage.
Oh, no,
mean.
sorry, I misunderstood. I wasn't clear. So in the current report, the 2023 report,
Yeah.
you have a very helpful data point that you shared, which was 92% of the survey respondents said that they did bikes, right? They had some sort of bike feature.
Yeah, yeah.
In looking through the 2022 report, there didn't seem to be an equivalent synthesis of the survey results that was like, back then, only 85% of the survey respondents said bikes.
Right.
So I'm just curious about year-over-year improvement of the measure itself, not the like nitty-gritty details of each of them.
Yes. I think back to the survey instrument, this year the survey, this particular chart that we're showing was not used in the last year's survey. So there are different ways of presenting data. In this case, the data incorporated percentages of the number out of 12 members, 92% had bike racks, for instance. So the fact is we didn't present those kinds of data last time. We are looking at we do not do I have not done a back and forth comparison or look back comparison, and that's a good observation. The fact that it is just a survey, I think if we've got consistent questions, we should be able to make some observations about that in the report. So I would like to take that as a recommendation for a future report to do a little look back and see, kind of like what we do for the trip generation.
That'll be great. Thanks. Okay, those are all my questions. I'll save the rest for comments.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. Can you explain again, how is the threshold determined for each of these projects?
I think that's a Sue Ellen. Do we know?
Each of the projects at the time that they're being developed have a TDM plan that's prepared for the individual project. And that's the time at which the applicant determines what TDM measures they'll be implementing. In the Rail Corridor TOD plan, there's a requirement of minimum 25% trip reduction. And so when we're looking at the TDM measures that are being implemented, there's a range of effectiveness. And so there's when you combine all of the measures together, there's a range low to high of how effective that may be. And in looking at trip generation estimates for full occupancy, partial occupancy, et cetera, that's at the point where we're able to determine what the short-term trip reduction goal will be and the long-term trip reduction goal. So it's determined in coordination with the applicant, with our third-party TDM plan consultant, and done at the time of project approval.
Thank you. And the survey only goes to the 12 or so project implementers? Has there been outreach to see if any residents or any of the businesses that are renting these spaces, or the residents who are living there, if they want to join?
So Community.org offers that surveying for employers and for property managers. It's not a requirement of the TMA members to do that, but we do that work with a lot of the different projects, and there's a couple in the TMA area, the employers, where we do the employer level surveys, but it's not rolled up into this TMA report because it's not part of the same process. So it does happen, and it's helpful for us to learn, but it's not actually a part of the TMA report.
So where is that data?
Oh, it goes to the employers that we work with, yes. I can tell you anecdotally, there is a large employer who is a tenant of one of the buildings in the TMA who is reaching out to us because they're in a very parking constrained building in the TMA area. And they bring their staff in 3 days a week. And on those 3 days a week when the staff are coming in, there's not enough parking. So they're working with us on a carpool parking program where we provide incentives and a carpool ride matching, which is what Commute.org does. And we're working with that employer on this property in this project, unbeknownst to the developer, who's the member of the TMA, who is required to meet the trip threshold. So it's just the way it works. The developers are meeting their trip counts on that property, but the tenants themselves are the ones that are finding themselves parking constrained and using TDM measures to help them deal with just the issue of parking.
Very interesting. It'd be good to see that information as well. And as some of my fellow commissioners brought up, it would be good to see the trends over time and if you can make any recommendations. Thank you. That's it.
I do have a couple of questions, but I also want to mention to my fellow commissioners, after we are done with the questions, we'll go through if there's any final comments you would like to share, and then we'll move into the motion. Could we go back to the slide with the 2023 survey highlights, and that's the survey of the members? I just have a couple of questions on that. It was the annual survey, maybe it's the prior slide where you've got the histogram. Not that, yep, that one. Okay, here's my question. These are member surveys, these are highlights. How does EV charging stations reduce vehicle trips? I could see the bike racks, the bike storage, delivery, and I'll ask you about what are delivery amenities, but I think I have a pretty good an idea. But it's not clear to me how EV charging stations reduce vehicle trips.
They don't. It's actually a greenhouse gas emission reduction technique.
Right, but this is a vehicle
It
trip
gets-
reduction.
Yes, but this is just one of the survey questions that we ask all of them, and we're just
This is what
presenting it
came
here. But
in.
yeah, it does not.
Right. Okay, got it. All right. Delivery amenities. What would be examples? Because I think that's important, and I think it's important particularly for Delaware Pacific, because I remember for 2022, there was a representative from the Delaware Pacific complex, and he had thought that, and they were over by 15 counts in their short-term threshold. And I recall him saying he thought it might have been delivery of food or products, whatever. But what would be examples of delivery amenities that could help reduce vehicle numbers or help a property meet their short-term threshold?
Yeah, a great question. Delivery amenities has been a long-time TDM strategy, and the idea was that if you could allow groceries and products to be delivered and put into storage lockers and so forth, that would reduce the number of trips that people would need to make when they did come home, for example. So let's say they were out at work, you could do their deliveries and drop-offs during the day, and then when the residents were coming back to their property, then they wouldn't be making multiple trips. And it was just an idea to reduce the number of trips. It wasn't that there were no trips, because
Right.
obviously
I mean,
the
yeah,
delivery...
you can never get no trips.
Yeah.
We're talking about meeting thresholds.
Yeah. The point that the property developer for the 2000 Delaware property was making was that when you do trip counts the way that we are, when you come into the driveway, that counts 1. When you leave the driveway, that counts 2. So if a resident was to be driving home from work during the peak hour,
Right.
and they come into the driveway, that's 1 trip. If that same person was using an Uber or Lyft or a carpool and being dropped off, it would count as 2 trips.
Right. So you're saying why would it be counted as 2 trips?
Because they've crossed the driveway twice, once in, once out.
Oh, to come in and pick up versus, oh, I see, right, in, out versus 1. Okay, yeah, got it.
So
All right.
it's one of those crazy situations where you're
Yeah.
actually better off having the person drive their own car to work because it only counts against them as 1 trip versus being dropped off as a carpool passenger
Right,
where
you
it
get
counts as 2
trips.
trips.
Right. And this is where I think goes to Paul's point is the need, and once again, these are, the need to get more data to understand the demographics, for lack of a better term, of these trips. So John, why do you think Delaware Pacific reduced their, they've improved from 2022 to 2023, from 15 to 5 over threshold. Any thoughts, or Paul, any thoughts on what's driving that? Is that the MTC? Or we don't know? Or when did the MTC go in place for that property? The free passes for the
Well,
MTC?
that's the Commute Plus?
Bay Plus.
Bay-
Bay Pass.
Bay
The Bay
Pass.
Pass, right.
Right, the names kind of shift around for me. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think what you're seeing is a true reflection of the amount of work that they have been putting into providing additional incentives and monetary incentives, in this case of the Bay Pass,
Right.
because it opens up different modes of transit to the residents, and so that I think is the key thing. They're really working hard to actually address this problem, and as a result, we've seen a reduction. It is a 2-hour period that we're counting, and that's important, but there is a reduction, and I think that the kinds of things, a transit trip oriented towards a commute happens during the PM peak period a lot, so it starts to make sense. So that's what I'm seeing. I think that it's kind of the proof that folks are working on it.
Sure.
Really understanding it.
Paul, I didn't look, but I've been listening to these reports since 2015. Is this the best year for Delaware Pacific 5 over short-term threshold, or have they done better?
They've done better. There've actually been some years where they've passed.
So things fluctuate.
Yeah.
Are any of those apartments BMRs? Are they both?
No, so half the project is. So 59 units are BMR and 60 are at rate.
Right. And then I thought your comment about the adult population and then mode being a younger population. Also, the on-street parking on pickups, I think that's a big one right there, going through and explaining double counts. Anyway, going back to understanding what's going in and out would be useful.
Yeah, Chair Rubinsky, I just wanted to point out from the table in the report, years 2017, 2019 were 50, 50, 58, 51. 2021 was 58. Now we're at 57. So you're seeing, about half of the record years being in the range of this current year. So maybe there's a trend happening. Maybe it's starting to go down.
Right.
But we're seeing a little bit of leveling there, if you will.
Sure, and that might be, yeah.
If I could just add quickly.
Sure, please.
So it's also important to note that, I keep harping on the fact that each of these projects is different, and they have different demographics, and they have different uses. They also have different targets. So Delaware Pacific has a higher target threshold, or higher target diversion on trips than does Mode. So, and they're struggling to make that 30%, which is what theirs is. The whole corridor area was a target for 25. Delaware Pacific is already at their 30, which was their short term, but they're supposed to go to 47 is their long-term target. The rest of Bay Meadows is staying at 25. But they have to go to 47.
So they have to go to, and what does that mean?
47% trip reduction.
Right, from 25 to 47. Yeah, got it.
Currently they're 30 and they have to go to 47, but Bay Meadows as a overall property, or as a project, the Bay Meadows project is only at 25 long-term. So it's going to be really, really challenging.
It is, yeah. And remind everyone again, difference between long and short-term thresholds.
Paul?
That particular project, or?
Just overall for the TDM report, because we've got, everybody has a short-term and a long-term.
Yeah, we have, it's actually in the report for, in the report on page.
Yeah, I know, I might have missed it, yeah.
So yeah, the short-term trip reduction goals and the long-term trip reduction goals for the, seven projects are there. The trip reduction goals for Bay Meadows are.
Oh, not for each property, just big picture. What defines?
What are they?
What define? I think I seem to recall.
If I could,
please. Yep.
If I could jump in.
Yep.
Short-term goals are the lower trip reduction goals that are implemented when, for development of the TOD area as a whole. So they're lower because there's expectation that projects are not going to be fully constructed, that the roadways and multimodal facilities are not going to immediately be available, that projects may not be at full occupancy right away, et cetera. So you start off with a lower threshold to aim for when you're starting out, and then long-term generally would kick in at full build-out of the rail corridor area. And so for each project, there's a little bit of a difference between when the long-term thresholds are supposed to kick in, and that's something that staff still needs to narrow in on. But really, like, you have the lower target when you're first starting out and kind of getting into it.
Right.
And then the long-term is full build-out. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they're really embracing and living and, commuting in the TOD sort of lifestyle.
Got it, yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, that's all the questions I have. Let's just go to final comments and we'll move to motion. Commissioner Michaels, any final comments?
I don't have any more comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robbins. Vice Chair Narita.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I think this is the third rail corridor TMA report that I've learned from. So thank you so much. And I think what I'm getting at, and I assume Commissioner Robbins is also getting at, is an evolution in the report itself, not necessarily needing more raw data from the survey, because I remember we were over Zoom, and it was like the survey was like a new thing that was done, and then our feedback was, this was awesome, thank you, please continue to do that. And you've continued to do that, and I just want to name that and appreciate it. And so thank you. And please thank on behalf of the commission, the members who responded to that survey. It's a wealth of information, and we really appreciate it. But I do think that there's like an evolution in the report content itself that could be valuable, especially as we basically use this as the beacon for a potential citywide TDM ordinance itself, right? And that's why in the future, in the next May 2025 report that you do for 2024 data, it would be lovely to have those kinds of apples to apples, year-over-year comparisons across the measures, right? How have things evolved across this data set of buildings? Because this is really valuable, hyper-localized information that can help us contextualize the broader policy that, may be in place. And so I think that's actually just an evolution of the content of the report, again, not needing more data from the members themselves. And then I think I am also, similarly to Commissioner Robbins, hungry for your expert opinions on things too, from that year over year, right? If that's whether or not that's just more questions that we can pepper you with at the next TMA report session or in the report itself. But I do think that there's a wealth of information that we need to really get serious on understanding as a community, given the fact that this, there's the broader policy at play. I still remain a little confused in terms of like when these long-term trip reductions will occur. This was my anxiety last year. It remains an anxiety because hardly any of the properties are within that long-term goal. They're not expected to, obviously, now, but they're just not ready yet. And, depending on when those deadlines happen, I just get a little, I remain nervous about that, and I don't know if we're talking about these deadlines being activated in a 2030 timeframe or in like a 2027 timeframe. These things kind of matter for preparation and notice, and I do think that the properties will need notice to not get complacent. I don't know, to John, your point, they won't do something until they have to do something, and I don't know if they know when they have to even do something more than what they're doing right now. So that lack of clarity is concerning year over year. And then finally, I do think that there needs to be some kind of alignment between this rail corridor, and all of the buildings in it and their TDM plans and the TDM ordinance overall citywide. And so I would recommend that there is, that council does provide that direction to staff for that kind of alignment. Now, it could be in terms of penalties that they basically just get grandfathered in, and from whatever year that the ordinance passes, they have 3 strikes after that or something. But I just think that there's a very existential fairness argument for any new development coming into San Mateo if you have this existing suite of buildings that just into perpetuity can just be like, we don't need to worry about that. And that just sets a bad bar and a bad tone when instead this is the location in the city that is meant to be, again, that beacon for TDM, not like we got grandfathered in and we can slack off. That's not the tone that we want to set in any sort of preparations for a citywide TDM ordinance. So some kind of alignment on that will be needed. I also am concerned about the alignment between long-term goals in this rail corridor plan and then the point system, outside of it. I think there's a lot of messaging that will be a little challenging to navigate with all of that. But yeah, thank you. Those are my comments, and look forward to next year's report. And always very grateful to learn from you all. Thank you.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
I just thought of one more question I have. I think I saw something in here about there's parking management, parking cash out. I'm wondering if you have any idea, and I didn't see it in the highlights, of the role of charging for parking.
To my knowledge, none of the members are doing that. Making parking as scarce and expensive as possible is a fantastic TDM strategy for a city to make that happen. So, but no one is doing that right now. The one project I did mention that is an underparked, it was intentionally developed that way. It's in close proximity to the train station. And so parking is a challenge, and it's really working because it's forcing people, not because it's a charged parking, but because there's not enough of it. It's forcing people to look at alternatives, which is kind of exactly what you want them to do.
What is the parking cash out?
That's when someone who gives up a parking space or gives up the right to park there, you can actually compensate them for that, for their giving up of a parking space and not using it.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Any final comments or? Okay, that's it. All right. Just a couple of final comments. Some of them you've already heard from Commissioner Robbins and Vice Chair Narita. That is more detail. And I'll share with everyone how I look at this particular TMA or report. I look at this as a bit of a laboratory. I'm looking at it. I think right now it's the only one in the city that we monitor on a fairly regular basis. And so because it is a laboratory, I'm hoping it informs, and I know it has informed the city in terms of as we start to build out this citywide TDM. And so providing as much data as possible to inform our staff on how to best write an ordinance and present it to the commission, the public, city council is, I think, really useful. I think there's only so much you can extract from this exercise, but we've been doing this exercise, I think, since 2015. So going back to their comments, that is next year providing more data, and particularly as it relates to the demographics, the driving demographics on Delaware and the Delaware Pacific complex, I think could be useful and possibly, hopefully, useful to staff as we once again start to write this citywide ordinance. I would encourage staff to start, Sue Ellen, you had mentioned staff is in the process of now kind of starting to develop those long-term thresholds. Going back to Vice Chair Narita's point, letting everybody know well ahead of time when that's going to happen. But anyway, those are my two comments. This is a laboratory. What can we get out of it for our citywide ordinance and then the long-term thresholds? And then, like I said, seeing more demographics next year on Delaware Pacific. Thank you. Okay, so we have questions answered, comments made. So we now move to the motion. The motion is, does the commission recommend to City Council to accept the 2023 Rail Corridor Transportation Management Association Annual Report? Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to be accepted.
Okay. Second?
A second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, roll call on the vote.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer,
Yes.
Vice Chair Narita,
Aye.
Chair Owinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Robbins,
Aye.
Commissioner Michael.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to Paul and to John, and also to Sue Ellen, who we'll see on our next agenda item. So thanks. But we genuinely look forward to more data. Okay. Okay, everyone. The next item on tonight's agenda is an update on the Complete Streets Plan. This item is for informational purposes only and does not require a motion by the commission. We will begin this discussion with a presentation from Sue Ellen Atkinson, the principal transportation planner for the city of San Mateo. Following Sue Ellen's presentation, I'll go back to Madam Chair. We'll take a poll on our public speaker count, and once all public comments have been heard, we'll bring it back to the commission for final questions, followed by, after questions, comments. So, Sue Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Owinski. Again, Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with Public Works. And I have with me for this overview of the San Mateo Citywide Complete Streets Plan and Project Update, Carrie Modi from Farron Pierce, who is our consultant on this project. So tonight we'll be doing a brief introduction and overview, refresher, if you will, on the Citywide Complete Streets Plan, summarize outreach that's been conducted since the last time that we were in front of the commission, talk through the components of the plan that have been developed since our last presentation, and then go through questions for the commission. And just as a preview, questions for commission tonight are focused on modal priorities for different types of roadways in the city. So as we're going through the presentation, if you can keep these in the back of your mind, is prioritizing safety and speed management on neighborhood or residential streets the appropriate modal priority for residential portions of the city? Does the prioritization of bike, pedestrian, and transit modes on our mixed-use roadways make sense for the city's vision moving forward? And finally, is prioritization of autos and pedestrian modes on our major east-west connectors appropriate for the city's circulation network? So diving right in to background on the plan, we've talked through this slide previously. We are well aware that the city has a lot of adopted plans. They're color-coded very beautifully here, but we have a lot of plans that are primarily a single mode. For example, pedestrian master plan, ADA plan, bike master plan. We also have regional plans like the Reimagined Samtrans plan. These are all focused on one way of getting around the city or the region. So the impetus behind the Complete Streets Plan is to serve almost as an umbrella for these plans. Each plan, for example, the Bike Master Plan prioritizes bike projects. It does not speak to how to prioritize if a bicycle and a pedestrian project are proposed for the same roadway. So the function of the Complete Streets Plan is to provide an opportunity for us to comprehensively prioritize how we're approaching getting around in the city. It does not replace or get rid of any of our singular modal plans, but rather it allows us to prioritize across modes based on roadway characteristics and modal prioritizations. For any specific projects, those modal plans still stand. So you might still be asking why Complete Streets. Complete streets give us the opportunity to improve safety for all transportation modes and to reach toward the newly adopted General Plan 2040 goal of Vision Zero, which is zero roadway fatalities or severe injuries. Complete streets aim to make streets safe, comfortable, and accessible for all users, which is particularly important in San Mateo, where we're largely built out and for the most part, have very narrow roadways on which we're trying to accommodate all these different ways of getting around. There's very limited on-street space, and when we're trying to accommodate getting around by car, on foot or by wheels, bike, transit, you run out of space very quickly. Designing roadways from a complete street standpoint allows us to take a step back and think about all users when we're moving forward. As mentioned, the Complete Streets Plan is in coordination with our recently adopted general plan. It includes, the general plan update includes a Vision Zero policy, adopting the safe systems approach toward transportation planning. And it also sets a policy priority of rebalancing the city's investments to address infrastructure disparities for all modes and in our equity priority communities. Similarly, you are also aware of the local roadway safety plan that's going on right now. So whereas the general plan is the roadmap for the whole city and the Complete Streets Plan fits in under the general plan in moving some of those priorities forward, the local roadway safety plan fits in under the Complete Streets Plan and goes hand in hand in identifying specific safety improvements. So we're lucky enough that these two plans have been going on at the same time, so we've been able to coordinate in terms of outreach and ensure that, for example, the safety improvements identified in the local roadway safety plan are mirrored in the Complete Streets Plan. So in terms of plan process, this is not new to any of you. We really went through a layered approach in developing the plan. So first we identified goals with the help of the commission, the council, and our stakeholders. And those four main goals were derived from the circulation element in the general plan. With providing transportation options, safe and comfortable travel, equitable mobility and access, and inclusive engagement. Then we took all of the plans that we currently have and all of the data available to us and layered it together. And we're able to come out with a corridor map that we'll be going, reminding you basically of later, taking all of that information, figuring out where the overlaps are, figuring out where the hot spots and challenges are in terms of where we're trying to accommodate different modes, and gearing this plan toward helping us make those difficult decisions. So all of that has happened over the time frame of about 1.5 years to date. We started way back in 2021 or so with applying for grant funding for this project. Bless you. And then have gone through the plan process with existing conditions, needs analysis, developing policies and network recommendations, and identifying priority projects and working on the design standards manual. So with that, I'm going to move into outreach and summarize the outreach that we've done since the last time we spoke with you. So again, the outreach approach, we've aimed to be as comprehensive as possible and really get out into the community, meeting people where they are and having different engagement opportunities so that people can engage in a way that feels comfortable for them. So this included stakeholder interviews. It included having information available in different languages and hosting workshops in different languages, and having different formats. We had active transportation, tours, walk, etc. We had standard workshops, we had focus groups, we had online engagement, we had pop-up engagement at established events. We're really trying to spread the net wide to get as much information as we could. So coming into what's new since we were here last, we went out into the community for phase 3 of our community engagement, and this was really focused on getting feedback on the 10 identified priority corridors and the multimodal improvements that have been recommended. So we went to the community through 3 different workshops focused in our already established council districts. This information was shared with the community through a number of different methods: citywide e-news, social media channels, outreach to our neighborhood associations, notification to our elected and appointed officials. And workshops had an open house format where people could walk around, ask questions, get comfortable with the material. And we also had a formal presentation as well. So we hosted 3 workshops held in various locations throughout the city and gained some really important feedback and some good exposure to the community. At the same time, understanding that folks might have things that they'd like to do in the evenings other than attend a workshop with us, we offered the same information through a survey. So we set up the survey so that they could select a corridor, view the information, and then provide specific feedback on the corridor, very much mirroring the style in which the workshops were set up. That survey was open just over a month. We received quite a lot of feedback. Some of it is summarized here. So as I mentioned, in the engagement, we received quite a bit of feedback on all of our priority corridors, as well as some overall feedback, and had a really great time engaging with the community at those workshops. Throughout the engagement to date, we've really seen some themes that have surfaced, which probably are not very surprising. For safety, connectivity on different modes, congestion, accessibility, and then we also were able to get confirmation of our priority corridors and discuss the trade-offs in terms of roadway space with our community. So with that, I will pass it off to Carrie.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to just talk about what's new since October, when this was the last time that you all received an update on the plan. Next slide. So we'll talk about the 4 main areas that the team has been working on. First is policies and actions, a series of recommendations, implementation and funding strategies, and then the design standards manual. On the Complete Streets policies, these really establish the federal, state, regional, and local policies that have already been established. And so some of the bases for these include the City of San Mateo's 2040 General Plan, the city's Climate Action Plan, MTC has a Vision Zero resolution, as well as the MTC's Complete Streets policy. So a lot of really important underpinnings that this plan is really looking to. And each of these policy principles has a set of developed policy actions and supporting materials. And so I want to walk through a few examples of those, as well as one of the most critical pieces around modal priorities, which Sue Ellen alluded to earlier. Excuse me. So within those 4 primary principal policy areas, first we have prioritized safety. So the general plan already makes a commitment to working towards Vision Zero. So that means achieving 0 fatal and severe collisions. You'll see a lot of different actions in this chapter that really point to how to do that. So the goal is great, the setting is really important, but you need tools for how to actually get there. One of the tools that this looks to is updating local speed limits. Of course, this is something that the city already looks at on a routine basis, but looking at opportunities for speed management for the urban corridors in San Mateo is really critical. Under rebalancing priorities, I'll talk about this on the next slide, but one of the most critical elements here is using street typologies to set modal priorities. So being clear and very specific about what are the modal priorities on different streets in San Mateo to deal with those competing interests. And so you can have clarity on that, there can be transparency on that, and then you can use that to really implement that. And how you'll do that is with the design manual. So this is a component of the plan that really focuses on the kind of how do you do that. And it creates clear standards for how to do that as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in this presentation. Funding and implementation is a really critical component of this. And so we want to make sure that there's tools in here that the city can use to make sure that funds are used as effectively as possible, and that really the city is aligned within different departments and across the public works staff and with you all as the commission, the council, to make sure that all of those pieces are really working well together. That can look like including a repaving checklist for the paving program and looking like realigning program funding around the goals of this plan. And then the fourth component here is about engaging communities, and you already saw some of this going into practice with the plan process itself, but wanting to make sure that each and every project really has accessible engagement strategies. So talking about making sure that there's multilingual interpretation that reflects the communities that the plan would affect, and also implementing project level engagement plans to make sure that there's clarity around what the community engagement approach is and how that feedback will be used. Slide. And so going a little bit more into modal priorities. So the modal priorities, this is an example of one of the key actions under this policy header. The modal priorities are determined based on land use as well as available right-of-way. And so we can, establishing those essentially creates the modal priorities. And so there's a map that's included, again, determined by the combination of land use, so looking at residential, commercial, or mixed uses, as well as the available right-of-way. So is it a really compact street? Is it kind of intermediate in nature, or is it broad? Based on those combination of factors, the design manual then invites someone to look up and see what those different modal priorities might be, how that might play out on different streets with different kinds of right-of-ways. So it really clarifies those design standards and provides some specificity for different kinds of treatments on different streets. So it provides that how. And this allows for more prioritization and justification. So that's really the intent of having those standards, to make sure that there's clarity on that front and a basis for how decisions are made. So what does it look like to be a modal priority? Just wanted to give some examples here of what that can look like for the different travel modes. So for a pedestrian priority, that might look like prioritizing increased safety and connectivity, increasing access to schools, parks, trails, and points of interest. Similarly, on the bicycle side of things, really focused on those attributes within the bike network itself, and acknowledges that things like road diets or parking removal could be needed if the bikeway, in order to make the bikeway. And so that'll again vary on the right-of-way width, and that's why that's such an important component of this. For autos, that may look like speed management to make sure that there's safety on the corridor. It also may look like sensitivity to impacts that might decrease vehicle throughput, but really not at the expense of multimodal safety. And for transit, that might look like prioritizing bus reliability, enhancing infrastructure, which also could involve things like road diet or parking removal to fit those bus-only lanes if recommended. But there are certainly other tools in the toolbox as well. And it also explicitly looks at including making sure that there's bicycle and pedestrian access to transit stops. So people have to be able to get to the bus or the train station as well. Next slide. And this is the resulting map. So each street in San Mateo has a designated modal priority. What's shown on here are really the major streets. Those are shown in the different colors, and it's a combination of modal priorities in a variety of cases. And you'll notice that most of the map is shown in gray, and that's because all the other streets in San Mateo are really neighborhood streets. And so the priority on those is proposed to be safety, and that's whether you walk, bike, take transit, or drive. Next slide. The next component of what we've been working on are the recommendations. And so what this did was really take the needs assessment as a basis and really combine these different many modal plans, the different modal priorities, and package them up into corridor projects and neighborhood projects, which are the numbers shown on this map. And then also identified several area plans, one of which is already underway with the North Central Complete Streets Plan, and then a future project around the circulation in downtown. And the top 10 of these projects received additional project development and community review, and that was really the focus of the workshops that Sue Ellen mentioned earlier. This is an example of the level of detail and the kind of information that was included for those 10 priority projects. This is intended to kind of package up the projects across the different plans that have previously been developed to add a little bit more definition and make sure that those are all in dialogue with each other. It also really is intended to highlight the trade-offs. So you'll see on the bottom right corner, there's a box that really highlights some of the tougher decisions that the city will need to make to advance these projects. These can be included in grant applications and things like that to advance the projects further. Implementation is also a really critical component here. We talked about some of the ways that that might look, but one of the key pieces is that additional funding is really going to be needed to advance these projects. This is very much a planning study, and so the next piece will involve securing more money to advance the projects that are included in it. This gives you a sense of just some of what's being looked at in the context of this strategy, but there's a lot around different funding strategies and different implementation strategies, including specific actions that the city can take moving forward to advance projects towards implementation. There's also cost estimate information included, and we know that some of the most expensive costs tend to really be around paving and signal upgrades. The final component here is around the design standards manual and toolbox. So we talked about this a little bit before, but just wanted to kind of reiterate why this is so important. It's really important for clarifying the kind of how to interpret any policy related to design. So this is intended to be a very clear document, a very accessible document, and something that provides consistent and enforceable standards. That's a really important component of this. And then it creates a process for navigating decisions. So information is also included about how to go through that project development process so that it's clear how to use the different tools in the manual and how to translate those modal priorities into concrete projects and specific actions for the various streets in San Mateo. This slide just provides some examples of what that might look like. The graphic at right shows there's a section on dimensional information and includes example cross sections for the different street types. This is just one example shown here in the graphic. It also, for example, includes when and how to install different bicycle intersection treatments, so provides guidance on what to do where. And then also defines when and how to mark crosswalks. So based on different roadway characteristics, defining what kinds of treatments you would actually use to do that based on the latest safety best practices.
All right, I'll take back over now. Thanks, Carrie. So in terms of next steps from tonight, we anticipate presenting similar information to City Council likely in the next month, and then coming back to both Commission and Council with a draft plan during the summer, and then moving into adoption after that timeframe. After adoption of the plan, we would shift into ongoing implementation, which looks like securing grant funding for the projects, ongoing coordination within the city, and then updating to our current practices to best practices as identified. So just to circle back, of course, we welcome any questions that you have, but wanted to focus in on a few. And when we're going through these questions, I'm happy to bring the map back up so that you can have a little more time to digest that. So the first question is prioritizing overall safety for all users on neighborhood streets the appropriate priority for our residential portions of the city, reminding you that the majority of the city are those types of streets. Does the prioritization of bicycle, pedestrian, and transit on mixed-use roadways make sense for how the city envisions moving forward for transportation? And the third, we'll be able to point you to on the map a little more clearly. We don't have many east-west connectors in the city, so we've proposed prioritizing automobile and pedestrian modes on those east-west connectors, and we're asking if that is appropriate for the city's circulation network. So with that, that concludes the staff presentation. Carrie and I are both available for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Let's look at public comment. Let's take any in person, obviously not. Nothing on the, no one on the phone, no one remote. Okay. Alrighty. Then we'll come on back to the commission for questions, and then we'll go through a round of questions and a round of comments. Who would like to start? Yeah, okay. Commissioner Robbins, yeah.
Sure. I hate to mess up the order. It's just so non-shui. That's just bad. Yeah, I really only have one question, which is this design standards manual fascinates me. Is that going to have the force of, is intended that will have the force of law or just be a guide?
It is intended that it will be adopted standards. So whether the city or another entity is building a project, we will adhere to those standards within the manual.
Okay, so they will be approved by city council, or will it be purely at the staff level?
It's anticipated it would be approved by city council by resolution.
Okay, and then if it needed to be amended, it would have to go back to the city council?
That's correct.
Okay, that was my question. Comments later.
Commissioner Riddlemeyer?
I'll follow that up with what other, or are there other cities that have a similar design manual, either developed or under development?
I can answer, and then Carrie can fill in anything. Most cities have adopted city standards and standard specifications for how to build their facilities. The city of San Mateo has specifications for our roadways, our sidewalks, when we're installing a sign, almost all of these items. Currently, we look to our pedestrian master plan in terms of sidewalk development, but when adopted, the pedestrian master plan referred to those as guidelines. So we do run into some issue in terms of requiring those dimensions, et cetera. And the city does not have currently adopted standards in terms of bicycle facility design. So while we have some, we were, as staff, very excited for this to have adopted standards for how to design these multimodal elements of the roadway. To the question of if other cities have something like this, City of San Jose has one very similar that was really of interest to staff as we are going through and developing. City of Burbank was another. There are a number of cities that have these really clear multimodal standards, but again, most cities have design standards or design specs already adopted.
Okay. It seems like it would be great if, Burlingame, Belmont, if we could build out that connectivity with the neighboring cities. So I'm wondering if there's been any outreach to our adjacent cities.
Not in terms of the design standards manual. Each city does tend to move forward on that type of item on their own. But it's possible that once adopted, they may look to ours. We can always hope for that.
Maybe be the model for the other cities. Speaking of connectivity with other cities, I've been hearing a lot of constituents talk about El Camino. And I know that that's not something that's really under the city's purview so much. I'm wondering what's the feasibility of actually adding a bike lane and a bus only or a bus only lane to El Camino?
You're correct that El Camino is not under the city's purview. Any recommendation in terms of project that the city were to do on El Camino would need to be in coordination with and approved by Caltrans. In terms of the Complete Streets Plan, we have proposed a transit and pedestrian priority for El Camino, and that is to further the Samtrans bus network that's proposed on that roadway, and also to enhance pedestrian accessibility along the corridor to transit and across the corridor, which is one of our toughest barriers for pedestrians to cross, and something that we heard a lot about in our outreach. But again, any proposed project would have to go through the Caltrans process.
Okay. What could the city do to push that forward? Anything? If a lot of residents are suggesting that a bike lane and bus-only lane would be beneficial for them. What could the city do?
At this time, the staff recommendation in the Complete Streets Plan is for transit and pedestrian priority. So we're not recommending, for example, a protected bike lane on El Camino at this time. Even on El Camino, we do have limited right-of-way. And in order to provide that through opportunity for excellent transit service on El Camino, we do need to make decisions. We need to be able to serve our businesses that are on El Camino, ensure that they're able to maintain their customer bases, et cetera. So right now what we are proposing is to prioritize transit and pedestrian access. That doesn't preclude provision of any other facilities for other modes. However, those two modes would be prioritized over others.
Okay. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Michaels?
Thank you for the presentation. It's a lot of information condensed. I also have a question about the design manual, and I was wondering if you could just give a more understandable explanation of how it'll be used, like if an example of a project or grant funding or the actual implementation of this Complete Streets and design manual, so I could just understand how it works for staff members or the members of the public or a developer.
Sure. You know, at the base level, the plan is the what, and you know, what is Complete Streets? What does it look like in San Mateo? And the design standards manual is the how. And that was the direction given to the consultant team, was tell us how to build this. And so that's really the intent behind what the design standards manual provides. So for example, when we're developing a city project, a roadway improvement project with class 2 bike lanes, this tells us, based on what type of roadway it is and how wide the roadway is, how to design the travel lanes, how to design the bike lanes in terms of width, in terms of what type of striping to use, how often to have bike lane symbols, et cetera. So it gives the real nuts and bolts of how you design these facilities.
I think, you know, it would provide both for our, for our field staff, if we have to go out and do, you know, paint a bike lane or something like that, it gives us the guidelines of how to do it. It's also the material that could go into a set of construction documents for a city project, as Sue Ellen is saying, so that the contractor knows exactly how to stripe facilities or to build, you know, a bulb out or something like that. Would give all the dimensions and the details, but it's also information then that as we're looking at development projects, and if they're required to implement these new standards that would get adopted, that it would give them the details that they would then also know exactly how to build it to meet our standards. So it sort of serves multiple different purposes of how those could be implemented.
Thank you. I'm also wondering about I think the prioritizing safety is really interesting. And I was able to attend one of the workshops, and I saw, you know, firsthand just, you know, not the controversy, but just the debate that happens between we want parking, we want bike lanes, and you can't always have both. So is that also how the design manual, like I'm just trying to think of prioritizing a design manual, like if you have a neighborhood and if it's prioritized for bikes, then does that mean you could then show to residents, like, look, this is prioritized for bikes so that we're going to minimize parking? Or I don't know if I'm articulating that way, but I'm just curious how it'll be used for just from a public point of view too.
Yeah, maybe to start with kind of the first part of the question there on safety. So yes, safety is a big part of the underpinning of the design manual. And so early on in the design manual, it kind of walks you through what that process would look like of how to prioritize safety in the project development process. So anytime the city's looking at what to do on a certain street, someone has to make those decisions along the way of, and typically that's the project engineer, right, of what is actually happening here. At the intersection of two separated bike lanes, should it be a protected intersection and really be safe and accessible for everyone there? Or is it okay to have maybe a lower order treatment that, like a two-stage turn box or something like that? And so this design manual really walks you through those pieces of what are the different safety tools and at what point in the decision-making process do you need to use that. It follows the new federal guidance around safe system, and that's put out by the US DOT and the Federal Highway Administration, and so it really focuses on tackling the roadway issues that are known to cause safety challenges, and then looks at things like speed management from there, which is another major factor in safety outcomes, on down to like more lower order tools, things like flashing lights, things like that, to just like raise attention. So it tries to kind of factor in the biggest moves first that would have the most foundational impact on safety. And so there's a flow chart that kind of describes that, for example, as part of the decision-making process. To your point about how the public would use it, that's a good one. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that too, but I mean, I think this is intended to be included as an appendix to the plan itself. And so I think it's also really a tool that the public can hold on to too, and really read it and understand it and say like, that this is what you all said you were gonna do. And so there's also, I think, an important piece there in terms of accountability that can be a two-way street as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Narita.
Thanks. Could you pull up the rainbow spaghetti roads map thing? It was just really pretty. Thank you. So on this one, it looks like El Camino is blue, which says pedestrian, bicycle, and transit modal priority. So is that a typo / color O mistake?
Yes, that is. That should be the pedestrian and transit priority that Sue Ellen described earlier.
Okay, and so that actually doesn't have its own color yet, pedestrian and transit alone.
Correct. That's a more unique combination in the map. Yeah.
It would be a different color combination. Okay. And so, like, what led to the decision to not prioritize bicycles on El Camino Real?
In our bike master plan, we identified El Camino for further future corridor study, and we were able to do that as part of the complete streets plan. And looking at the roadway as a whole, the land uses, the right-of-way that's available, and also existing plans like the reimagined Samtrans network, looking at the future plans in terms of transit service, plans for improving frequency, et cetera, on El Camino. It appeared that prioritizing access to transit along El Camino as one of the major backbones within San Mateo was a key priority in our roadways. Reimagined Samtrans changed a lot in terms of our bike network in San Mateo, and El Camino really comes out as one of the priority transit corridors. And in order to support that, we need to be able to have the roadway function in a way that allows for that frequent, accessible, and reliable service that Samtrans seeks to provide in the future.
Are there bike lanes across El Camino and other parts of the peninsula?
There are bike lanes along El Camino, I think in Redwood City. I'm thinking along perhaps parts of Belmont. Other than that, I would have to go back and do some research to give you more information there.
And so basically what it sounds like, it's a competition, if you will, between transit and bikes that you had to weigh. And because of the need for a very efficient and, transit system on El Camino. Therefore, you had to deprioritize bike facilities on El Camino. Is that an accurate summary of what you've just described?
I would not characterize it as competition or
But I mean,
you know,
bikes
which
aren't
wins.
prioritized, so.
Bikes are prioritized on other north-south corridors in the city because we're lucky enough to have those. I think that there is a lack of region-wide planning in terms of what El Camino looks like and in terms of how to prioritize transportation along El Camino. So it's not a competition per se between the modes, but it's really unfortunately, when you're going jurisdiction by jurisdiction, it's making the decision that best serves the community that you're working in. And in looking at the plans for transit service and the opportunity available along El Camino to provide great access to transit in the future, that is an area where we felt the need to prioritize transit, which is not prioritized on many other roadways in the city. That does not say that we can't provide bike facilities in the future, but we would want to prioritize the allocation of roadway space for transit to accommodate those Samtrans lines that will be running, that currently run, to be frank, but also allowing opportunity to have in-lane bus stops, et cetera, to make that service more seamless and more accessible. Provision of bike and transit on El Camino would mean other factors would need to be considered. Removal of a travel lane, changes to parking, et cetera. It's one of those we can't have it all. And so on this roadway, we felt that the priority for transit would be providing an opportunity for portions of the community to have accessible transit and to make it really much more reliable and easily accessible. And again, we do have the ability to serve with prioritization of bike facilities on other roadways.
Right, but so to get the definition of accessible here, though, and what I'm listening to is pedestrian accessibility to transit, right? Like that's the part that's like pedestrian plus transit being prioritized means pedestrians using transit is prioritized, not, and I don't know the volume of bicyclists who use Samtrans. We don't have that kind of data in front of us, but that's what I'm hearing though, right? Because like the words accessibility also to me suggest actually bike access to transit as well. So I think there's messaging that, and we've seen this in the feedback, right, from the community,
yes,
that there is messaging that needs to happen that's a little crisper and cleaner and doesn't necessarily, and cars are never discussed in any of that, for instance, right? Like none of, like that's I think the challenging thing that I'm kind of trying to question is like, why, because essentially we have in the local roadway safety, there were several bike accidents that were occurring on El Camino, were there not?
Yeah, there are certainly bike collisions that occur there. I think part of what's happening here with the notion of accessibility is that one of the biggest ways we can improve bike accessibility is improving east-west connections across El Camino. And so that was a big focus of the bike plan. And all of those recommendations are carried forward too. Some of those collisions that you're pointing to are occurring at those intersections of the bikeway network. So some of them are people going across El Camino, not just up and down. There's certainly some folks who are interested in north-south access along El Camino as well. I think to Sue Ellen's point, you could still consider that if that was something that the community really wanted to mobilize around. But then the trade-off becomes, do you take an additional travel lane? Do you remove additional parking? How does that work? And so having it not be bike priority doesn't mean it's off the table, but it means that the trade-offs will be even that more stark to try and make that happen.
Okay, great. Other questions I have. So on the design standards, the audience, just to confirm, I think we're all, the commission sounds confused about the design standards. The audience is city staff, field staff that Matt mentioned. And then for construction, is that construction of like sidewalks? Because like sidewalks are part of like whatever development project that occurs?
Yeah, I mean, developers, engineers.
Because they don't paint streets, right? That's the city.
Yeah, so it's really a wide audience, which may be part of the confusion. So it's quite a few different folks. So city crews, city engineers who are doing the designing themselves, if the city is contracting out that work, they would also need to refer to the manual to make sure that they're making decisions appropriately as part of their project development, especially early on in the process. This is a tool for developers and the CDD staff to make sure that they're understanding what the expectations might be along a project frontage. So there's really a wide range of folks, including members of the public, who might want to say, like, this is what you all are saying that is the standard here, and being able to point to something more specifically that the city is committed to with regards to multimodal tools.
Okay.
To further on your point in terms of development projects, the engineers or frankly contractors, when they're doing the project, yes, sidewalk standards definitely, but also on our development projects, for example, if they're a whole block, they may be proposing a curb extension, bulb out. That the design standards manual includes information on how to design those. If they're impacting a roadway, they may be required to restore the roadway, which means paving and restriping. So they need to have striping plans contained within their development application.
Oh, I see. When they destroy a street, they do.
So
okay, got
yeah,
it. That's super helpful.
so it's not just sidewalks, but yeah, the universe is pretty wide, but it's really intended for those who are designing and implementing the facilities and maintaining.
Okay. Sorry, going back to the beautiful, colorful spaghetti roads. I'm confused because the east-west corridors here look like they're purple, which also prioritize bicycles. So is that also a mistake? Because one of your questions to us was, does it make sense to prioritize automobiles and ped? So are these colors all wrong?
Yeah, so there are 4 east-west streets that go over 101 specifically. So those are the ones you're seeing in purple on the map currently.
Those are the ones you want feedback on, right?
They are the ones we want feedback on, and you're correct. It is incorrect on this map. It should be auto and pedestrian on those 4 streets. So Peninsula, 3rd Avenue, Fashion Island, and Hillsdale are the 4 that
Basically, all four of those plus El Camino Real should be a different color entirely, because they will all be auto ped.
The 4 that are auto ped priority are the 4 that cross US 101. El Camino Real would be ped and transit, so that's its own thing.
So it's a different color. Okay.
Yeah.
So then nothing actually is actually purple. Like purple, nothing is actually purple on this map. That's like a mistake color.
I think that's correct.
Through the chair, if we could consider taking a few minutes, we can get the right file up for you.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you.
And that was my mistake. My computer crashed and I was working off of an old file. So entirely on me.
Okay, no, it's okay. It just, it'll be good to understand. Okay.
Chair, may I use this as a quick break?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, good idea. Yep. Let's reconvene at 9:05. Thanks.
the purple would just omit the word bicycle. Would that still be accurate then? Okay. So to that point, I was just curious, like, what was the kind of line of reasoning behind automobile and pedestrian for the east-west? That was my basic question.
Yeah, so some of the reasoning was around concern about just there being such limited roadway connectivity overall across 101 that a lot of those streets also have a lot of pressure for vehicle throughput on them too, are really important in terms of regional access as well as local access. And so that's why those are a little bit more uniquely prioritized as auto, whereas like typically those have been used more around commercial areas or places like that where you really do need to make sure that the land use is kind of matching that. On the pedestrian side of it, why that's prioritized, that's really about, again, that safety piece that we were talking about before. So the most vulnerable user of the street is a person walking. And so making sure that there's just that kind of very basic and safe accommodation across those four streets in particular, just again, because there's such limited ways to get across that barrier.
And so the basic,
Sorry, just to follow up on that, again, having that priority does not preclude others. So for example, for Hillsdale, on the existing overcrossing, whereas we would prioritize the auto and pedestrian movement, if we're able to utilize transit signal priority to accommodate buses, or if we're able to do signal optimization for auto throughput so that we're still prioritizing getting vehicles through, but that enables us to modify the lanes in order to add a bike facility, then that's something that we certainly would do. So just to demonstrate that prioritizing certain modes does not mean that we can't look at others.
and in the design standards, does it speak to like the use of sidewalks for biking? Because I know we have a couple examples, right? Like right around the Hillsdale Caltrain stop, there's like the super wide sidewalk that currently allows for biking and ped. Is that kind of a feature spoken to in the design standards?
Yeah, that's actually a Class 1 bike facility, which is a shared use bike and pedestrian path. So one example is right around the Hillsdale Caltrain station. The Bay Trail is another example of that. So it can be done in different ways. But that's actually, it looks like a sidewalk, but it's a bike facility too.
Okay, got it. Because like on the east-west over around Third Avenue, right? Like they also, you have like a tunnel that the bikes can go through and the peds go through. Like, would that be considered then a Class 1 facility? Because like bikes use that to then get access to the Bay Trail later, right?
Are you the bike ped overcrossing?
Yeah, on Third, right? Would that be?
Technically, an overcrossing is kind of a unique
It's kind of
animal.
like a weird thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
in and of itself, but technically it is a shared use path for both bikes and peds.
Okay, got it. But that's like not, so that doesn't show up necessarily in the design standards though, insofar as like that sort of stuff would actually be project by project. You'd have to make a decision as to whether or not you would make a Class 1 facility like that.
Another item in the design standards manual is the determination based on roadway type, vehicle speeds, vehicle volumes of what kind of bike facility you're going to be designing. So that's another aspect that is contained in that manual. And so, yeah, it is decided at the design stage what type of bike facility you're doing, but the design standards are contained in the design standards manual for example, a Class 1 path. Again, an overcrossing is a little bit of a different implementation that requires a lot more engineering. But for a more standard Class 1 shared use path facility, the standards would be in there.
Okay, great. And then the last question is, I saw Bethany at the corner of Delaware and 28th when she was doing the feedback on the safety, and we were talking about the design and the use of green paint. And I was surprised to learn from Bethany that the green paint used to paint bike lanes is apparently very expensive. And so I was curious if you could speak to that insofar in the design standards. Like, what is our green paint policy or green paint design standard as it stands in the right now?
In terms of what's included in the design standards, it's intended to be used sparingly. So in the past, you might have seen more people like really blanketing the bike lanes with green, and then, yeah, it was really expensive. And so that was maybe not the most effective use of funds. And so the green that's called out in the design standards is really focused on highlighting conflict zones. So that might be at key moments at intersection conflicts where drivers might be crossing the path of travel of a bicyclist. So intersections, driveways, places like that where you're going to see more interaction to make sure that drivers are highlighting the visibility. But again, in terms of the big picture side of things on the safety side, green paint is kind of lower on the list of really effective ways of making it safer for bicyclists because it attracts some visibility, but that's all it does. It doesn't provide more physical protection or change the speed of vehicles, anything like that.
Whereas like a quick build or like a bollards or something like that would actually improve
provides a little bit more physical protection.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so is there data about the efficacy and safety intersections of like an apples to apples comparison of like green paint throughout versus like collision spots? Like, has research been done on that in your experience across, since you work across jurisdictions?
Yeah, green paint does have a fair amount of research, and so yeah, it has some minor benefits in terms of safety efficacy. It's not as robust as things like really.
Oh, totally.
Exactly.
Those things are like on a different.
So you actually see
level.
it probably more minimally talked about in the design standards manual, just because it is like a treatment. It's a more minor treatment, but an important part of like the total package.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Could you pull up the slide we were on? And then I'm just going to go back. Can we go back a couple of slides here? Slide, I want to go to, what is it? Slide 28, which talks about it had the 4 modal priorities. Yep, there we are. Okay. First off, I do want to acknowledge and thank you. I see that we've now included the wheelchair in our icon. So I appreciate that. I think I've been advocating that, and it's important. That group of people is important. So under modal priorities, where would folks that need, who use mobility assistive devices, be it walkers, wheelchairs obviously come to mind, big time. Those are probably 2 that I can think of, but particularly wheelchairs, because wheelchairs can help get people out. And I did say this because I did attend the District 1 and 5 workshop, and I had suggested then that we should add another modal priority, which would be the ADA impacted community. So I guess maybe, what is the thought about adding them or not adding them?
The way that that's commonly dealt with, so an inclusion of people with a variety of different abilities, whether that's mobility related or otherwise, almost always you will see that the way pedestrian is defined is inclusive of people who might be using some sort of mobility aids or in wheelchairs. You'll see that in most pedestrian plans, most active transportation plans. So that's how pedestrian is defined here.
Right. I would probably disagree with that based on the people I know in wheelchairs and some of the challenges that they run into. And it's not the city's fault, but for example, those ADA ramps, some of them have lips and they can't get over them with a wheelchair. So there's a whole host of unique challenges. I don't agree with that, I'll share with you, because I think this group of people have challenges that none of us can envision, frankly. And my recommendation would be, if that is indeed pedestrian, you would include, however you want to put it, ADA impacted community, handicapped community, however that is defined. But I don't agree with that, personally. And there's not much I'm going to do about it, nor is anybody going to really care, but I don't. Which then goes into my next question, since your group was tasked with our outreach, is that correct?
Yeah, the consultant team included a sub-consultant, winter consulting.
So did you reach out to anyone who uses mobility-assisted devices in your outreach? Did anyone reach out?
Early in the plan process, when conducting stakeholder interviews, we did conduct a stakeholder interview with the Paratransit Coordinating Council and requested information from them about how best to reach the audience and any higher level concerns, issues, et cetera.
Right. And did they provide anything that was incorporated, or do you remember? I mean, this plan is so sprawling, frankly. It's a big plan because you're talking about incorporating Samtrans, you've got the east-west connections, and I'm talking about a very specific modal priority here. You know, like I said, I mean, this is a big plan, and that group of people should be included. But going back to, so very early, but yet were they carried through the entire planning process? And new people added.
We made an effort throughout the engagement process to get information out to all stakeholders and to do engagement in a way where a wide variety of the population could be included. But specifically to notes from that interview and then how it was carried through, we would have to cross-reference specifically for that. Offhand, I wouldn't be able to do that very effectively.
Right, okay. And I understand that. I guess my recommendation here, when we get to comments, will be to add the, however we want to put it, community under pedestrian and talk about specifically their needs, bullet out a couple of their needs as well, because they are unique and they will affect their ability to move to get to Samtrans. And Samtrans, by the way, has got a pretty good system on picking up and dropping off wheelchairs. In fact, I think not pretty good, I think it's a very good system. And getting these people out so they can get to work and participate in community should be a really high priority. Also in your outreach, can we go now to the map we were just on, the color-coded map? I see El Camino is recommended to be prioritized for pedestrian, bicycle, and transit. There are a lot of businesses along El Camino that use on-street parking for their customers. House of Values comes to my mind. They've been around for 40, 50 years in our city. There's numerous restaurants, all of that bit. How will such a prioritization affect their on-street parking for their customers?
Through the chair, with apology again, my error. The map, while it indicates bicycle priority for El Camino, that is not the recommendation carried through in the plan. It's intended to be a transit and pedestrian priority. So in the El Camino priority corridor cut sheet, it's recommended that there's a bus-only travel lane that is constructed in one of the existing through lanes. So it's not recommended that there are substantial changes to parking on El Camino in order to accommodate that.
Okay, all right. You know, because we have to be very cognizant of our businesses, and I'll tell you, I really learned that lesson when we did the San Mateo Drive bike lane and took away all those businesses on street parking. I heard about it too late, but it stayed with me. Okay, so those businesses are not going to lose, both on the east and west side of El Camino. Got it. They're on street parking for their customers. The Alameda is blue, and that is that pedestrian? And is that Alameda? Now I'm moving what would be to the left side of the grid. Thank you. Yep. Is that the Alameda? And is that pedestrian and transit, or what is that prioritized for?
We're going to have to imagine again.
Okay, that's fine. Yep, we can imagine.
This was a map that was created earlier on before we layered in the priority corridor recommendations. So on Alameda, we're recommending a pedestrian and bicycle priority.
Okay. All right. And there's a lot of residences, less businesses, a lot of residences, and residences who also use on-street parking. So any thoughts on what's going to happen to their on-street parking? And here's what happens. You can eliminate on-street parking on the Alameda, and then what happens is then it pushes into the neighborhoods, the surrounding neighborhoods. So then they get impacted.
Understanding that the recommendation on Alameda is a road diet, so reducing travel lanes.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so reducing the travel lanes as opposed to removing the parking. Okay, got it. Let's go back to that yellow. Thank you, Sue Ellen. Yes. So here are the 10 streets, and you've just done a nice segue into my questions here. And out of the 10 streets, the 10 we'll call priority corridors, which looking at them, they're fine. I could kind of see some logic on this. Is Hillsdale is a priority, and that is automobile and ped. And what are the thoughts on on-street parking on it? Because that's got a lot of on-street parking.
What I would suggest is if we want to go more in depth on the priority corridors, that you give me a moment to pull the cut sheets up that are on the project website, because Hillsdale is actually separated into two segments.
Okay.
With the eastern segment being automobile and ped, and then the western segment being bike, ped, and transit, I believe. So if you'd like to go more in depth on the priority corridors, we can.
So the eastern segment is, and eastern is probably, is it east of the El Camino? Is the El Camino the demarcation point? We can imagine.
If you can give me a moment, I can pull up
okay,
the
we can, yeah.
cut sheets. Yeah, one moment.
I don't
please.
want to take up,
And Carrie has a better memory than me. The division is Franklin Parkway.
what's that?
I think I'd like to pull up the priority corridors really quickly, and then
Okay.
we'll be able to have answer without any question here. Edison is the demarcation.
Edison is,
Yes.
okay.
For the west side. So you'll see here, it's sorry, I misspoke. It's a pedestrian and bicycle prioritization for the western portion.
And then the eastern portion would then be,
Our auto and
bike.
yeah.
All right, so bike is in there. Whether they share it with that is whether auto is prioritized with them or not is the difference there. Okay.
Yeah, for Hillsdale particularly, given the connectivity for Caltrain and to Foster City, we are trying to prioritize bike where we can there, and pedestrian is already provided for.
Right. Okay. And on-street parking, particularly actually, there's a lot of on-street parking on that whole street that I see. What's the plans on that? Is there plans to remove on-street parking, or we don't know yet?
While we don't know until we go into design on a certain project, it looks like there is expected to be minimal parking space removal. We're proposing protected intersections in some locations that involves removal of parking spaces at corners, for example. Sorry to keep scrolling. And then on the western portion, if we are able to do a separated bike facility, we'd be looking at a road diet there. So that's where the signal optimization would come in.
Right. And what I hear you saying is you're sensitive to this need. It is a need, and it exists. I regret, and we have bikes, but on-street parking is important. Okay, thank you. One last question here. Actually, two questions. This one's landscaping. Is landscaping, trees, shrubs, biobasins, will that be part, are we getting ahead of ourselves at this point with that level of detail?
No, green infrastructure is addressed in the Complete Streets Plan, and it's also part of the Design Standards Manual.
Right, okay. So that's in there too. And then on Saturday, there is the South Delaware School, there's a pop-up on Saturday. Is that part of the Complete Streets? Or is that a separate project? I don't remember.
That's a project that was identified in the Bike Master Plan.
That's it.
So while it's coordinated with the Complete Streets Plan, it's a project that was already identified.
Yeah, it's over on the Bike Master Plan. Okay, all righty. And then one last question. I just want to dovetail off. We did hear from residents on bike for ECR, but kind of what I hear is saying is based on how Samtrans wants to prioritize ECR, which makes sense. And we've got PEDs and we've got businesses who need parking. What's your thought on our bike users and micro and e-scooters and e-bikes and all of that bit? What happens to them on ECR? Under the current modal prioritization for ECR and what Samtrans wants to do with ECR, and also the fact that ECR is a state highway. So I guess the city's limited in obviously what it can and cannot do on ECR. Let me ask my question another way, and this is my final question, is how would you respond to those 4 or 5 people, Sue Ellen, who sent in, you got a copy of the letters. How would you respond to them based on what's being proposed? The plan that's being proposed. And like I said, understanding ECR is a state highway, Samtrans, also a state agency through the county, has priorities on making that a major bus thoroughfare. How do we respond to those people, if at all? And it may not be possible based on forces out of the city's control. I don't know that.
I think the response would be that we are trying to best utilize El Camino in the highest and best way that we can. And in looking at all of the roadways throughout the city, there are other north-south opportunities on which we can and do prioritize bikes. We can't say the same for transit. And in looking at the city as a whole, in coordination with regional plans and with our transit providers, it would behoove us to coordinate our plans in a way that moves those transit providers' plans forward. The city does not provide busing. We do not provide trains.
Right.
So our colleagues at Samtrans have done an enormous amount of work in doing the Reimagine effort and have put a lot of effort into figuring out how to best provide transit throughout San Mateo County. And in San Mateo, one of those locations is El Camino.
Right.
So for best serving our residents and for best utilizing the right-of-way that is available to us, My response would be that we need to align with those plans that are in place while providing access for other modes in other locations where we can.
Right.
And Carrie?
Just also wanted to note that the general plan does speak to the transit and pedestrian priorities, so that's very recent planning decision that's council adopted. So
Right.
it's
And within the, on the ECR.
yeah, and it's I mean, with specificity speaks to both of those things. So there's a lot of basis for that decision. There's also a lot of other safety improvements that are included as part of this that benefit bikes, and I appreciate that that's not the same thing as just installing a separated bike lane up and down the corridor. But there are other basic safety improvements that benefit bikes that are included as part of this project.
Right. And as Sue Ellen mentioned, that there are other north-south routes that bicycles can take. Okay, just a couple more fast questions here. Oh,
Just
please.
quickly, Chair, I think, I mean, this may already be clear to everyone, but I just want to make sure it is clear, and Sue Ellen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the modal analysis of the vehicle volumes and speeds would dictate that the only appropriate bike lane on El Camino would be a completely separated bike lane. And so that is where it
Yeah,
does
that's what I would
require-
imagine,
That
yeah.
is where it requires that we would have to take away right-of-way if we're also going to take a through lane to dedicate to transit, that the only way you've got room to actually maintain 2 lanes of vehicle travel and put in a completely separated bike lane would likely be to take away the parking lane.
Right.
And so I think that's the trade-offs that we have to balance, and that's why I think from our perspective, we have other north-south corridors that make more sense for the bike priority, and that prioritizing, as Sue Ellen said, with the other priorities that are happening with other agencies on transit, that's why it seems to make the most sense. I mean, that's definitely our most challenging roadway in terms of the volumes and the speeds of vehicles to have bikes right next to vehicles, and that's why you need to have a separated one, and it just takes space to do it.
Sure. No, and I appreciate that. And like I said, we got 5 letters on it, so I just wanted to bring it up and put it within context. Just a couple of more, this will be a quick question. Going back to your questions here, Sue Ellen, when you talk about prioritizing safety and speed management on neighborhood streets, the appropriate modal priority, I didn't quite understand what that meant. Prioritize safety and speed within neighborhood streets, get it. Is it for the appropriate modal priority for residential portions? I quite didn't understand the appropriate modal priority piece.
To better word it, it would probably be is safety for all users and speed management the appropriate priority for residential roadways.
Right, so when we're in residential roadways, safety and speed, regardless of whether I'm a pedestrian, a bicycle, an auto. Okay. And the second question, does prioritization of bicycle and transit modes on mixed-use roadways, what are examples of mixed use? Would that be Delaware?
It's generally the streets you saw mapped earlier. So the major streets in town typically are more mixed use.
Peninsula, Hillsdale?
Yeah, those ones, those ones both also cross 101, so that might be a little different, but certainly like in the core of the city, like anything that you're seeing really in green or blue.
Right.
And I think yellow. Yeah, really what you're seeing in green and blue on this map are the kind of core mixed use areas.
Okay.
And so essentially confirming that those are the correct modal priorities around those land uses.
Right, for those mixed-use roadways. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. You know, the questions are really good. I hope we can help you out with them. And I have some comments on how to help us to answer your questions, and when we get to final comments on that. Okay, if no one has any final questions before we wrap up, comments? Anybody have any comments? Do we want to take a stab at responding to the questions? Okay, please.
Can you point to the north-south corridors that are bike-friendly?
That goes a bit back to the bike master plan when we were looking at our north-south connectivity and then east-west connectivity. So within the city, we have Alameda de las Pulgas is a great north-south connector. We also have Palm Avenue that's not far off from El Camino. Delaware extends quite a bit through the city. And Claremont is also one of the other opportunities that goes north-south for quite a consistent distance.
But Palm goes from, I'm thinking specifically, near El Camino. And Palm does not, it's very limited as far as where it goes.
It stretches down to 25th Avenue and then up into the downtown area. So it does serve transit. It also serves our primary downtown core.
But getting that way of 25th. Yeah, south of 25th. Where do you suggest going south of 25th?
South of 25th, Delaware is a great corridor. That's where we're doing our Class 4 and Bike Boulevard project.
And then there's nothing between El Camino and Alameda.
That's more difficult, particularly given the crossing at 92. Yeah, but Alameda does go north-south through the entire city.
I mean, I have to say, I understand why people are saying El Camino.
Understood.
Because it makes sense in a lot of ways. Because it connects all of San Mateo and other cities. So I can really understand why people are saying that. And these other streets don't do that. They don't offer that same connectivity.
Yeah, I fully understand that. And in looking at mapping, that does align with your comment. To Matt's point, though, the required facility that we would need to design and construct is a fully separated Class 4. So then you've got a Class 4 bike lane, you've got transit, you've got auto. That's a lot of priorities to be fitting within the right-of-way. And so this is one of the things, like going back to the beginning of the Complete Streets Plan, making difficult decisions in terms of our right-of-way. If everything is a priority, nothing is, and in this case, we can't fit everything as a priority. So fully understanding your comment and agreeing in terms of connectivity with regard to the type of bike facility that we would need to provide to comfortably move cyclists of all ages and abilities on El Camino, fitting in with the other priorities and how El Camino is utilized. We were not able to move that forward as a recommendation.
That's it, thank you.
Okay, do we want to wrap up and respond to the three questions? So Ellen, if you can, we'll do the best we can on this. Commissioner Robbins, you were pretty adamant.
I'm just ready to move on a little bit. I think we were repeating ourselves a lot tonight. Okay, on your three questions, I have two overarching points before I'll answer them specifically. One, which has been mentioned before, but parking is a big problem in this city, and it's going to be for a while. So I think we need to just be mindful of that. As much as we'd like to move forward without parking, people are not getting rid of their cars in the near term. I mean, I was chair of the general plan committee. You know, it's all nice, but at some point it becomes a little bit pie in the sky, and I think we do a disservice to our residents, certainly for the near and midterm. So that's one. The other is something we haven't talked about a lot, is the Green Street designations. I know there's a separate plan that deals with that as well, but I think that's something I would want to see prioritized more. It adds a safety element. It can do multiple purposes, environmental as well as safety. But I would like to see that rise up in terms of a number of these areas. Now to your specific questions, On one, I would just say yes. I think safety and speed management are hugely important, particularly in our current posture in the residential neighborhoods. Item 2, I say a somewhat weaker yes, because I think there's, again, a wishful thinking part on the bikes and pedestrians. I think we need to look that way, but we need to be mindful of society as it is in the next 10 to 15 years in all likelihood. Item 3, I'm going to be a bit annoying. I know I read the materials, and I know that a lot of, and I've heard this even back in my old park commission days, there are a lot of folks that would like to see more east-west flow in this city, but I just think it's not very practical given 101, given high-speed rail that's going to come. Unless and until we have above-grade divides everywhere, which is millions and millions of dollars. It's just not happening anytime soon. So I would not put that as a high priority. There's a secondary concern, which is really the regional, I think you use this term, regional and commercial impact. As much as some of the neighbors in Central particularly would not like it, when it really comes down to it, we need to have that access to our downtown if we want to keep this city as a place that people want to go from both north and south into the city to meet our commercial establishments. So I'm kind of a no on number 3, and that's it. Those are my comments. And other than to say thank you, both Sue Ellen and Carrie. That was very useful.
Commissioner Michaels. Yep.
Thank you. I'll take a stab at it. So the first one, prioritizing safety and speed, yes, that makes sense, especially since I think that was strongly heard at all the workshops as well. So I support that. The second one, prioritization of bicycle, pedestrian, transit modes on mixed-use roadways. Maybe because of that map and a lot of imagining, but it wasn't clear to me that transit runs on all of the mixed-use roadways. So I think it'd be helpful to just take a more refined look at this one and see on those mixed-use roadways which mixture makes the most sense of bicycle, pedestrian, and transit, and maybe just have that more clear in a map so that can decide on that. And then to contradict Commissioner Robbins, looking at that map, it felt really clear to me that an east-west, and when you say connector, I'm taking that to be over 101 specifically, that a bicycle connection needs to be strengthened between those two sides of the city. So, I'm not sure if pedestrian needs to be as strong. I don't know, from experience how much pedestrians go over those connections, but I would recommend prioritizing automobile and bicycle over those east-west connectors. Good luck juggling all this.
Commissioner Rittermeyer.
Yes, yes, and yes. Prioritizing safety and speed, yes, definitely. That helps everything. Even if you can slow down the cars, then that helps the safety of the pedestrians and the bicycles, no matter what. Even if the bicycles and the pedestrians are not being prioritized, just slow down the cars. Speed management. Prioritizing bicycle, pedestrian, and transit modes. Mixed use, yes. Not always possible to do all of them, understandable, but I see more and more people on the e-bikes, on the old style manual bikes, everything. So I think that's, I kind of disagree with Commissioner Robbins here, but I see within the next 10 years, we're going to be seeing a lot more of the e-bikes and the e-scooters and need a lot more safety features for those modes. And prioritizing automobile, pedestrian, and bicycle east-west crossings as well. I know that it's very much needed. So good luck.
Vice Chair Narita.
So the first one, yes. I don't know what else you would I mean, it's so broad and systemic. I feel like it's a trick question because it's like, duh. What are we missing here in this one that I'm not really quite understanding? Okay, great. We're not missing anything. For the middle one on mixed-use roadways, to be clear, I think this question is asking about these types of modes, but not these types of modes altogether. As we discovered in the map, there is actually no street where all three of these modes are being prioritized. Is that accurate? Okay. And so to that effect, yes, that does all make sense. On El Camino, I think it makes sense to prioritize transit, given what you've articulated. That makes a lot of sense. I realize, I'm sorry, this is a question now. Why was transit not prioritized for Alameda? I remember that being a potential consideration.
Excuse me. The reason it wasn't prioritized is it's not as high frequency of transit service as some of the other corridors like El Camino, so it's certainly still transit service on it. And there are bus stop improvements proposed as part of the priority corridor project. So you'll see bus improvements in there. So to that point of like, just because it's not the explicit priority doesn't mean there can't be improvements for it. That's the case with Alameda as currently proposed.
Okay, great. I also think it does contravene our local roadway safety data about bicycles to not consider a second-tier priority, if you will, for bicycles on El Camino over perpetuating the volume of cars, for instance, or if there's other creative ways to do design such that it can be a second-tier priority. I think that would be great. People use it all the time, and it's terrifying. And we have the data to show that people are getting injured seriously doing so. So if we're going to say instead, as a whole peninsula, not just San Mateo, but as a whole peninsula, if it's Caltrans or whatever, says nobody should be biking on El Camino. In fact, maybe we pass, policies that prohibit it. Then that could change behavior. But until that happens, people will get injured on El Camino biking because it is the only main thoroughfare that is like super easy to access north-south across the entire peninsula, let alone just San Mateo. So I just want us to hold that reality. The same reasons why it's valuable for transit are the exact same reasons it's valuable for biking and cars, and just naming, like, that's the tension that we're seeing. On Hillsdale, I disagree with the segmentation where between Edison and Saratoga, bikes aren't being considered. Again, I live right there. That is actually right in my neighborhood on Saratoga, between Saratoga and Curtis. Saratoga and Pacific, that area. And it is incredibly dangerous for bikes. And if you're gonna have biking on the more west side, how do you expect people to then navigate that area without some kind of continuous flow? Now, I'm holding the whole parking piece, and I think alongside any complete street plan needs to be some kind of concerted parking management plan, because, again, parking on streets is like a cultural thing, that it is not actually like something that it's essentially subsidized by our culture to do so, and that has to be strongly reevaluated in the next generation of life, of people who live in San Mateo. How much are we willing to pay for the street parking? What can that money for street parking be used instead in other places? Now, if you want street parking in a certain place, pay for it. And if you then use that money to develop infrastructure that would dissuade parking and need for cars in other places, beautiful. But we can't have it both ways. You can't have all this wonderful vision of infrastructure and accommodate free parking into perpetuity. This will not last into the next generation. And I just want to name that because it's completely unacceptable that we have so much free street parking in the city. Other parts of the peninsula do a much better job of actually making you pay for the parking that you are using rather than subsidizing it. Okay, that's my parking soapbox. On prioritization of automobiles and pedestrian modes on east-west connectors, I agree with Commissioner Michaels. I actually thought automobile and bikes should be prioritized on east-west connectors, and I mean that by in terms of actually crossing the 101 into Foster City area, right into the more eastern part of the city and then Foster City. Like, it surprised me to see pedestrians named there. Totally understand the need for pedestrian crossing across, like, you know, these connectors, but actually getting over the 101, that would be like, most of the time it's bicyclists that I see personally biking on those sidewalk overpasses, which is why I asked about that style of infrastructure, because I couldn't imagine that being able to be accommodated somehow creatively, and you would also serve the purpose of pedestrians, because basically bikes and peds should really be separated, I think, just instinctively on those overpasses. There's no need to have like a protected bike lane per se that's taking up more of the thoroughfare. So that's why I asked that, because if you solve for bikes across the overpasses, I think you will also inherently solve for peds based upon, you know, that type of design. And also, it contravenes one of the key priorities that we had in approving the Humboldt bike lane. Because the Humboldt bike lane, the main justification of it being on Humboldt was that it was going to create more east-west connectivity in the city by being on Humboldt versus being on Delaware. Because there was a lot of feedback at the time, if you'll recall, that the bike lane should be on Delaware. And the key justification was east-west connection to the rest of the city, which I was like, cool. I trust that that's the right judgment. And now we're seeing that bikes are not going to actually be prioritized in the east-west connectors, which completely contravenes why we approve, one of the reasons why I personally, and I think hopefully some of the other commissioners at the time, approved that bike lane. So we're just going against ourselves. Thank you. Oh, and great job.
I will, before I respond, I'm going to make, but I do want to, you know, the questions are good. I have trouble, and I'll share with you, when I have my packet, taking what's in my packet and trying to answer your questions. So I'm going to suggest when we do presentations, and I like the idea of what you need from us, but when you do the presentations to us, you know, you can talk about the plan and the process and engagement and all and that work, and it's important for us to know. But I would also say, then follow up with a presentation on your questions. Because like I said, I'm having trouble looking at my packet and translating it into these questions. And frankly, Sue Ellen, I don't do what you do for a living, so I get parachuted in maybe every month, maybe every 8 weeks. And so just keep that in mind. I think if we did that, that would help us to help you, or help you to help the city. Regarding prioritizing safety and speed in neighborhood streets, going back to it, that to me was a bit of a lead-in. In fact, I said, where is it? You know, I thought there was more to it, and maybe there is, I don't get it. But I do want to pick up on a point that Commissioner Robbins said, particularly in residential streets, is the green streets. That's the place where we can really take advantage, and landscaping is the most inexpensive way to really make a neighborhood feel like a neighborhood. Prioritization of bicycles, going back to the second question, prioritization of bicycles, peds, and transit modes on mixed-use roadways makes sense for the city. You know, I think that's really situational. I hate to say that, but I don't know if I had all the information to answer that. To me, I was like, all right, bikes, going back to Vice Chair Narita's point, on the western part of Hillsdale should be bikes and automobiles, which, by the way, I think when you showed us is that correct? Sue Ellen, when you showed us that second, it was bikes and automobiles on the western side of El Camino, which would then take you into Foster City. But anyway, going back to, I don't know if I can answer this because we're talking mixed roadways, but I don't know what mixed roadways. There's numerous mixed roadways. So I regret, I don't know if I can help you out on that. On the east-west connectors, I think Commissioner Robbins brought up a very good point about if, east-west is not going to work unless we get the underpasses. That, I think, is really key to moving automobiles. Going back to Vice Chair Narita's comment about including bikes, I think that that's important, but I could see the PEDs in terms of getting to train stations. So I would say on the east-west, what is really, I think, key to making that successful is those undergrades, those underpasses. We have that on Hillsdale, but I don't think we have it on any of the other three east-west, major east-west connectors. And obviously, that's out of our wheelhouse. I get it. But it's something that maybe if we have this in place, we could use it to encourage funding or grants to help pay for some of those underpasses. Okay, that's what I can do. We're going to wrap up with our final agenda item, and that item is final and reports, announcements, and meetings of interest. Anyone? Yep.
Yeah, through the chair, I have just a couple announcements. One is just looking at the crystal ball for upcoming meetings. At our next meeting in June, we currently only have the election of chair and vice chair, which is our regular time to do that. We had previously planned to bring the draft of our small cell design standard and ordinance update. However, we had a great study session on that with City Council on Monday night, and based on the recommendation from our City Attorney's Office and the outside counsel that's helping on that, there's a recommendation that we have more time for public review and input on a draft ordinance. And so in order to accommodate that, we aren't able to keep things moving as quickly as we had originally planned. So we're looking to bring the small cell item back probably in August to this commission, which would be problematic given that we normally cancel the August meeting. So we'll have to look at that in terms of, do we continue to have the August meeting and do the small cell then, or do we call a special meeting that would allow still people to take their summer vacations and avoid that? So we'll have to look at that, but we're pushing the small cell out further into the future to provide more time for comment. And so we would be looking at potentially bringing back the draft citywide complete streets plan that we had the study session on tonight. After what we did tonight, we'd be doing a similar thing with council, and then we'd ultimately be coming back with a draft complete streets plan. So the tentative plan is to bring that back to this commission in July, and then we'd be going back to council after that. So that's just a look ahead in terms of this commission. Happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Thanks, Matt. Sorry, so why wouldn't we just move the chair, vice chair to the front of the July meeting then, if there's nothing substantive?
Yeah, we'll look at that for sure. If we don't have any items, we wouldn't, I don't think, have a meeting just to do that piece. So we'll make sure that we have an item. Otherwise, we'll move that to likely the July meeting.
Right.
So.
Okay.
And then, yeah, potentially, if we don't have any items for June, we would look at potentially canceling that. And I don't think there are any items coming from the city manager's office that we're aware of that would be on sort of the climate change or the sustainability stuff that Andrea normally brings. So, but we'll double check on that. And then I did want to just give a brief report out that I went, I think it was last week, to DC with city manager and the mayor and council member Rich Hedges, and we spent 2 full days going around meeting with different agencies, as well as we met with staff for Senator Butler and Senator Padilla, and then we met with Congressmember Mullen and his staff as well. So I have an email ready. I'm going to hit send on it as soon as I finish the meeting. That is a summary of everything that we did that went to council from the city manager. And so I wanted to share that with all of you so you could know all the things that we did when we were there. We did get a lot of great information from agencies about grant opportunities and things that we'll be looking into. We met with Department of Transportation, Federal Rail Administration. We met with FEMA. We met with Department of Justice. We met with a bunch of different agencies on a bunch of different city priorities. And we also focused in our discussions with our elected representatives and their staff on 2 earmark requests that we have put forward. One that it would be to try to get money to do design and permitting and environmental review on dredging the Marina Lagoon, and then the other one is to try to make improvements at our Lakeshore Recreation Facility so that can provide full-time preschool for 80 kids. And so we did get some positive feedback on those earmark requests. We'll have to see how those go through the process, but we're hopeful that we may be able to get some funds for both of those projects, or at least one of them. So happy to take any questions on that, but I'll send an email that has all the details of everything we did. And with that, that's all I have.
Sure. I do have something. Is this Commissioner Riddlemeyer's last meeting? So, and you've served here for 2 years. Okay, well, I think on behalf of the city and your fellow commissioners, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I've decided to not ask for a reappointment, mostly job related. So, but I'll be back, maybe on that side of it.
Well, yeah, I think we'll see you on this side, probably related to bicycles,
Yeah.
right? So anyway, but thank you, and it's been a pleasure to serve with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other announcements? Reports? Otherwise, I'm going to our next, I'm seeing no. Okay, I'm going to close out our meeting. Our next regular commission meeting is tentatively Wednesday, June 12th, starting at 7 p.m. And this meeting is now adjourned.